Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live webinar on Securing the Edge, how to protect virtual desktops against endpoint threats. I'm Fernando Faria, the CMO of ThinScale, and today I'm joined by my colleague Bas van Goor, our head of sales engineering. The reason we chose this topic was the huge interest we saw in a recent Gartner report we promoted called Choosing a Desktop Delivery Model for the Digital Workplace. Some of you have already downloaded it, but if you haven't, please email me and I'll send it to you after the webinar. I will share my email in the comment section shortly. The report highlights the operational advantages of VDI and DAS, but it doesn't quite address their security challenges, and that's what we want to focus on today. Bas's team has experience securing virtual environments and addressing these concerns, which he will share with us. We've also allocated ample time for questions from the audience, so feel free to post them in the comments box now or after Bas's presentation. So let's get going. Bas, a very good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Fernando. Delighted to be here. Before we embark on this journey, let's take a moment and set the stage. We're here obviously to explore the critical aspects of endpoint security within the context of a virtual desktop, VDI, or a desktop as a service, DaaS scenario. Today we'll address security threats, attack vectors, precautions, and seek to answer the ultimate question: can you be secure with VDI and DaaS alone?
Brilliant. So just to set the scene, I'm going to ask Bas 3 questions. And after that, we're going to open to questions from the audience. So Bas, many people assume their VDI and DaaS environments are secure in and of it themselves. But can you explain why this might not be the case, especially when it comes to securing the endpoint?
Yeah, sure. So in today's ever-evolving landscape, I understand VDI and DaaS play a big part in delivering a solution that is flexible and scalable for your application delivery strategy. There are some key considerations to determine which of these particular delivery models suits your technology or your solution best. It being a VDI or a DaaS or a combination of both. It's important to think and important to remember that regardless of which one you choose, they both share similar challenges, and that is the endpoint. VDI and DaaS environments alone do not only guarantee you complete security, you'll have to consider the endpoint. The endpoint in itself will play a big part in the overall service delivery. In other words, what are you currently doing about protecting the endpoint? The endpoint in itself remains vulnerable. Things like viruses, scams, or mistakes by users, how do you protect against those? Even as you can see, VDI and DaaS will offer some control, but it's essential to focus on the endpoint. Particularly because when analyzing most of the published cybersecurity incidents I've been involved with, known of, or have worked with, or have been reported to us, the starting point of those particular attacks, the weakest link, so to speak, very often is the endpoint itself. So it's no surprise that the endpoint is the most targeted device by cyber criminals.
Perfect. So what are some of the key security threats to the endpoint that organizations should be aware of when using these virtual environments?
I feel it's of the utmost importance that all remain a heightened awareness of security threats in general. There are so many. However, we want to have a look and take a closer look potentially at a few of them because they're prevalent threats that we often see in these environments. Endpoint control and protection gaps. We see organizations have a lack of control or fail to protect their endpoints. This will inevitably open the door to allowing untrusted devices to connect. And that can lead obviously to vulnerabilities and compromises in your overall security posture. We see hacking and social engineering being used. It's often that these techniques are being used to extract user credentials, And we all know, obviously, once credentials have been stolen, been compromised, you basically give away the key to your VDI and DAS environment so people can connect and do whatever they like. If you combine that with inadequate or potentially no data safeguards or the absence of not having controls in place, that will result in data being exfiltrated from your environment. And if you make that relevant to the VDI and DAS world effectively, think about the virtual channels between the VDI and the endpoint. How do you prevent moving data from the VDI to the endpoint? Are you blocking copying, pasting of data? Are you placing watermarks on screens that data cannot leave the organization by mobile phones being used, etc.? So ensuring a robust data protection measure is in place is critical. But last but not least, zero-day exploits. And that's perhaps the biggest concern, to be honest, in the ever-present threat of zero-day exploits. They lead to they lead basically to devices being compromised. And effectively, what you need to do in order to prevent zero-day exploits from being utilized is have a robust strategy in place in order to block and mitigate it. What we often see and what I feel works best effectively is a zero trust approach. So only allow the things that you trust to be executed on the endpoint. And by having that particular protection in place, ensure that only those particular devices can connect to your environment. By doing so, you will close the loop in your deployment. These are the most common challenges that organizations often face, I find, in their virtual environments.
Perfect. And just to finish off, and again, if anyone has any questions, please drop them in the comment box. As soon as we finish with question 3, we're going to open to the audience. So that's the right time for you guys to start asking your questions. So final question for you, Bas. What are some examples of the most common attack vectors that cyber criminals might explore when targeting virtual environments like VDI and DAS? And what is the solution?
Yeah, excellent question. So as you can see, obviously, I've got a couple on screen and listed the most common ones that we see, but I'll pick a few and go a little bit more in depth on those. So, for example, malware, ransomware, the attack factor of that, effectively, what is the attack factor of malware and ransomware? It basically means that if you're not protecting against it, you open up your environment and the endpoints. Malware is basically able to infiltrate all the endpoints in your virtual environment, and it does that by obviously various means. Good examples of malware would be obviously infected files, phishing emails, or compromised downloads. So the impact of obviously a malware and ransomware and not having any protection against it is once that particular cyber criminal is inside of your systems, effectively leveraging the effects of malware, it can seriously disrupt your operations, steal data, encrypt files. We've all seen it in the news that there are demands on ransomware and hefty fines being asked. So it's important to protect against it. The prevention that we often see obviously around malware is to prevent robust and make sure that antivirus and anti-malware is up to date running. However, implementing a zero trust model and regularly updating patching your systems and educating users around safe usage of email, etc., will ensure you can be safe. Moving on to another one on that particular list probably will be obviously phishing and social engineering. The attack factor of social engineering being the deceptive emails being sent, messages, phone calls, or other tricks being used to have your users reveal sensitive data. And heaven forbid they reveal credentials to your environment. If you've been affected by those particular tricks, what will happen is obviously those credentials can be used, and those credentials can be used to have unauthorized access to your VDI environment. And again, like malware and ransomware, it can cause them to use and utilize your data breaches, stealing data, blocking, encrypting data. It's all obviously something we need to prevent. Some of the prevention that you can do and take against these type of things obviously starts with the user itself. So you can start to train them up and obviously allow them to recognize those particular phishing attempts. You can filter your email, etc. But there's always that particular chance that something will just slip through the net and effectively will be on screen on that particular device of that particular user. They click on that particular link and off they go. So what we do in order to prevent those type of things is obviously access control, multi-factor authentication. So that will provide identity and access to the environment. So you've got one layer of one additional layer of access to your VDI environment. You should consider implementing host checking. So effectively, whenever that particular endpoint connects to the VDI environment, do a check from the virtual environment to the endpoint to ensure that the endpoint is properly configured and that things like a zero trust model is active on that particular device. Having those controls in place basically means that you are better protected against the effects of phishing and social engineering. Another good one that we see an awful lot of is the state of patching of devices. So unpatched software that will obviously lead to vulnerabilities as well. So outdated, unpatched software, including the virtualization components themselves, can contain vulnerabilities. And once attackers know those particular vulnerabilities, they will for sure take advantage of them. Prevention against those particular vulnerabilities lie in obviously having a good strategy to update and maintain your systems, patch them, run a vulnerability assessment against them. So obviously take state of what you've got and what you need to protect. Weak authentication is also one that we see an awful lot of. Unauthorized access. So whenever what we see default credentials being used on devices or on golden images of VDI machines, easy to guess, passwords being able to be cracked using brute force quite easily, and having those particular things not set up and configured probably obviously will again lead to unauthorized access with all the data theft, system manipulation that can take place in those particular environments. So it's obviously of utmost importance that you start to consider using password policies, the MFA, host checking, and effectively on a regular basis, just run an audit, see which user have access to what particular resource, and based on that, effectively ensure that you offboard the right users at the right time. Don't have them leaving about in the system for longer than they should be. Data leakage, data exfiltration, effectively. So data can inadvertently leak from virtual environments to misconfiguration. Copy and paste being allowed, like I mentioned before, etc. Or effectively, it's the insider threat effectively having access to that particular data and moving and emailing the data out of your organization. All sorts can happen with data. The impact, obviously, of the breaches is often reputational damage to the organization, and that's very hard to recover from. But it's not unthinkable to have effectively regulatory fines being applied on data that has been leaked. So what are you doing to prevent data leakage, or what can you do to prevent data leakage, is implement data loss prevention, for example. There are very much, and there are solutions out there that encrypt data in rest, in transit, monitor the data and the direction of travel of that particular data, and especially within that particular virtual environment, make sure that it will remain in the virtual environment by blocking access potentially for moving it outside to the endpoint. Last but not least, on this particular list, again, zero-day exploits. We haven't talked about this enough. What we see in modern day and world, that obviously the exploits come harder and faster in than the fixes for those. So the 0 days, they're still out there. And the impact of a 0 day being able to take over devices, potentially the VDI environment itself, etc., can have a detrimental impact on the day-to-day running of your particular business. So obviously what you can do against it is being informed about those particular threats, subscribing to all the various news channels from your VDI providers, etc., to apply the updates when needed, when found, and patch them. predominantly, obviously, all the security patching associated with it. However, I think I can't emphasize enough that implementing a model where you apply a zero trust approach is often found to be the most effective. So you effectively, with zero trust, flip it, and you don't allow people to do what they want to do. They effectively can only do what you think that they need to do. And in that particular zero trust model, we basically block everything from running, only allow the applications that that particular user needs for their day-to-day activities to be used. That will prevent most of the zero-day exploits out there. Understanding these common attack vectors is crucial for securing your environment. I feel organizations must adopt a holistic approach to cybersecurity. They must incorporate, obviously, the security measures, the regular updates that we talked about, but they need to educate the users as well. Switching to zero trust models, protecting the endpoint, implementing proactive monitoring on these will mitigate these threats effectively. You just have to remember that security is an ongoing process. Staying informed about emerging threats and best practices is essential. I hope this helps and sheds some light on the various security threats and precautions you can take. However, you should always be vigilant when using virtual environments. Now that we've looked at some of these particular examples, these particular attack vectors, let's see some of them in action. I've got a short video that will show keylogger screen scrapers in operation. It will start with a compromised device. That particular device has a keylogger installed. The user on the device will connect to Amazon Workspace, and effectively the keylogger on the left hand of the screen will start to record on the endpoint what that particular user is doing and actually capturing everything that the user does, stealing, in this particular example, credit card information. When the user on the same device uses the thin-scale secure remote worker solution, we protect that particular device by the zero trust model and only allow the applications to run, in this particular case, the Amazon Workspace client, to connect. When that particular connection is established and you see the user continuing in the same session, whilst processing credit card information, nothing is captured by that particular keylogger. So this way, and by protecting it in this particular manner, you can ensure that keyloggers, key scrapers, etc. on your device, on your endpoint, won't cause you any harm. So that leads me to the ultimate question: can you be secure with VDI and DAS alone? And I think in the short 15 minutes we had, and we discussed about all those particular threats that might exist in your VDI and VDI DAS environment. It's imperative that you secure the endpoint as well. So in my view, you cannot be secure with VDI and DAS alone. You need to be thinking about implementing strategies around your endpoint, being it a zero trust model that you want to enforce and implement on your devices or other. But you need to be able to secure the endpoint. Otherwise, you'll left yourself open to vulnerabilities on your solution. If you want to discuss any of these particular topics in more depth, which I hope you do, please feel free to contact us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bas. So let's now open to the audience. We have just over 10 minutes left. Any questions you guys might want to ask us, just use the comment box down here, or you have my email address. If you'd like to do that so privately, you can email me. We will be checking your questions. So are there any questions, burning questions for Bas from anybody? Now is the time.
Right, I see a question being asked. Question coming in around, what about using a VPN to connect to your virtual environment? Would that not address the security vulnerabilities mentioned? The answer is yes and no. So obviously, when you leverage a VPN between the endpoint and your VDI environment, you will be securing the data that travels between the endpoint and the VDI environment. So effectively, the channel and the data movement between the two will be encrypted. So that is a huge protection that you have around, obviously, man-in-the-middle type of attacks that can't happen. However, everything that happens on that particular endpoint is still not addressed by using a VPN. So yes, it will prevent the man-in-the-middle type of attacks and ensure that data that travels over the internet is encrypted. But the endpoint, the attack vector, where most of the stuff happens and it's mostly targeted, is not protected by using VPN alone or in combination with VDI DAS.
Perfect. Any other questions? I'm checking my email here. If anyone has any questions, you can either use the comment box or you can email me directly and we will tackle them. Right. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll call it. Brilliant. Shall we just leave it there, Baz?
Thank you all.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Baz. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. We'll be keen to get your feedback and your any questions you might have after this. Feel free to send us on our LinkedIn feed or on the email address you have. Thank you for attending. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.